Dionysius is coming back from the previous show. I talked about Christ, and he witnessed what the Greeks do. He probably did in Israel too, but maybe he was too young to fully appreciate that they would have certain days. Dionysius, Bacchus, whatever you want to call him, shows up in history from the Greeks.
Mardi Gras.
Mardi Gras is a more modern time. People, it's wild, it's free, it's do what you want to do. Well, it was even freer at the time of Christ under the Greeks. It was even freer. And there was no rape per se, unless there was harm and injury. You were supposed to do as you chose sexually, and everything else was pretty. Some people use a bad word, liberal, but it was ultimately libertine, totally licensed to do it. And nobody was harmed, nobody was found guilty of anything under the law. And so Dionysius is Bacchus, and there's a number of other gods that are involved. And the Romans had their gods that are parallel to the Greeks. So it was the Romans imitated the Greeks in so many ways. So when Christ witnessed one of their festivals in the Colosseum, where people got in the middle of the Colosseum to sexual exploits to see what woman could outlast 10 men. Literally, they did stuff like that. The more strong the athlete, the longer he could go at it with a woman, and but more women could outlast most men. So when women became really important as dominant sexually, and if you could dominate a man openly in front of a large Colosseum, you then showed women's dominance was sexual, and that's what men always were proud of. You could wear a man out a lot faster than you could wear a woman out, and that became pretty clear. So men were very wary of who they started challenging in those festivals, and the Caesars took part in those. The leaders of the time took part in those. But coming into the current time, we had the coronavirus has affected people in the Mardi Gras festival in New Orleans, and they believe that made the infections greater because people interacted so much more wildly and intimately with no regard, and this corona thing took off in New Orleans. There's going to be a lot of people probably dying there. But so this is the bad side of that much interaction. Is it the immorality of it, or is it just simply the fact that we don't understand ourselves very well? The Puritans would have hated it. The classic case of the Puritans was that when the dancing girls in the woods were seen by men, they were chased, and the men that saw them were punished with stones on their chests till they were dead. And under Puritan times, they didn't, this kind of behavior, any wild sexual nude dancing was happening at the time of the Puritans. All those things were very taboo. So it's today we don't have quite that thing, but there's quite a degree of intolerance. But Mardi Gras will never go away. It's a tradition in Western culture, and does go back to the Greeks. And the illustration how the Romans honored the Greeks was in the sculptures and the statuary. And the best way I can tell you, the guy by the name of Michelangelo Buonarroti was famous because he copied a Greek sculpture. And what did he do? Since the Greeks had conquered the Roman area at one time, they lost artwork and statues and things like that in archaeological sites. The Romans spent the rest of their life digging up these sites. And the Pantheon building is in Rome. It's a famous public building to this day. They would put on a bulletin, a paper saying new finds in the archaeological sites. So one day in the 1500s, they put that up, a famous Cupid, a Greek Cupid was found, a perfect Greek Cupid, meaning it was something that looked like it came right out of a Greek temple. So they got a hold of a small one, but actually just beautiful white alabaster marble, and glowed, looked like living flesh. And they said, this is a marvelous, valuable find. And then somebody looked at the bottom of it, turned it over, and saw there was plaster on the bottom. They scratched off the plaster and carved in the bottom of the Cupid was the name Michelangelo Buonarroti,
Ah.
a 14-year-old Roman boy, and they created this thing. Well, he was immediately made famous, put in the school of Raphael, which is a famous art school at that time, and he ended up painting the Sistine Chapel, and he did hundreds of sculptures. His most famous sculpture is the David. It's in I think it's in Florence, Firenze, and that is, some people have seen it. It's in books, but it's in absolutely the Greek style, and it's just in this alabaster marble. It just glows, and you're looking at stone that looks like flesh. That's what it looks as what they call the Indian term for that. From India refers to that as prana, that flesh breathes and glows, and he achieves that in his carving, and he did these things. But he was a Roman. He was following the Greeks, and all of the Roman statues followed the Greeks. And if you look at the Greek statues in the Parthenon in Rome, in Greece, in Athens, you see similar things in Rome. They honored the Greeks in all terms. So Christ was coming along to change their mind about their own religion, and it was in Rome that Christ convinced the mother-in-law of Constantine, the emperor, eventually, to convince Constantine to become a Christian. And that is how that developed, and that is Christ really recruited, basically, in the catacombs, and got the Greeks to stand out in the open and become Christian. If you're going to be proud of anything, be proud of a religion. Come out in the open. Don't be afraid of being Jewish. Come out in the open and be a Christian. That's not Jewish. That's Christian. That makes you separate and proud of loving one another, which is what, and you've got a God that lives forever. Come out in the open, do that. Be what you say you are in front of the world. Love one another. Show how you do that. Forgive one another. And so now you're no longer in the catacomb. You're out in the open. And you're telling, we're like Romans. We have a God that lives forever, only he's not a Caesar. So you have an interesting parallel. And so when he comes back after 20 years to no longer 12 years old, 32 years, 20 years later, comes, and they've heard about him in Israel. They heard that this young rabbi is teaching this New Testament about love and forgiveness. And they liked that, because the heavy hand of the synagogue was the Old Testament in punishment. Thou shalt not, thou shalt not, thou shalt not. And he's saying, thou shalt. You shall. You shall forgive, you shall love, and you will love one another. And that's really what he brought back, and that's why he was celebrated on a donkey, and in Christian traditions, we call it Palm Sunday, just before Passover.
Great, it's great, man. I like this is great conversation, great information, man.
Well, I don't know how much.
Yeah.
It's a theory I have. Some people will say, and some people will say, that's just heresy, Augi. And I can tell. Are we done with this segment?
No, we good. I mean, we can still go.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, the reason I'm not
You got like 3 minutes. You want to close it out?
So
The closing segment.
where do I get this idea? I take the prayers themselves, like the Our Father. When you say the Our Father, you say, who's our? Who is our? That means if I'm sitting at a table and I say our meal is our meal, and I'm thankful for that meal, it means our meal. Our means you, me, and everybody at this table.
Yeah, we're all in possession of it.
That's right. So it's our brotherhood that's sharing in this meal. And that's what the idea of the Our Father was, about sharing and being like one another, equal to one another. And this is not, and so in 325 AD, the church was fighting up until 325 AD. That's after the death of Christ. 325 was they had a big meeting in a place called Nicaea. Nicaea is a Greek name for the city of Irzuk, I-R-Z-U-K, in Turkey. And it's a Turkish town with a Greek name, because the Greeks, when they took over, they renamed everything. But Nicaea was the name, and the Nicene Creed, or the Apostles' Creed as it's called today, is what people in Christian churches all will say. And they repeat the Our Father almost every Christian church, without exception, pretty much says it the same way. And so Constantine at the time, the emperor, who, like his previous relatives, were converted, and he was following on to that, said, you guys stop fighting. You bishops of Christianity, stop fighting amongst yourself. You're all bishops. We're going to have a meeting in Erzuk, in Nicaea, and you're going to settle what is this Christianity. Is this Christian Jews and Jesus, or is this the Church of the Holy Roman Empire? What do you want? One is about power, and one is about divergence and fighting and arguing all the time. One is about money and power, and they chose money. And so the guy who kept saying, no, we're about brotherhood, Christ is our brother, he's not a God, doesn't have to be a God, he taught forgiveness and love, that's what we're about. Arius lost the argument and was nearly put to death, threatened with death if he didn't. So they ended up burning his papers, but those papers were kept and have come out over the years. And the Catholic Church especially was a punisher, and Arius was a bad name, and his teaching was called Arianism, and the Catholic Church called it a heresy. And if you think like Arius, but I found that a lot of priests and ministers and so forth who are aware of this have become what they call Arians, and they follow Arius to this day. They don't accept the old traditional way that's been taught. They feel that it harms people, it doesn't help people. But the church didn't want independent thinkers. They wanted conforming people more than they wanted anything else, and that meant money and control. And so that's why we've got what we've got today.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with some of it, not all of it.
It's not whether you agree with me or not. I don't care if you agree. You can hold on to whatever thoughts you like, because love and forgiveness forces us, if we actually believe in what I'm talking about, to do exactly that.
Yeah, I fully
So if you have to announce to other people, oh, he's got me leaning in this direction, so therefore I can't.
No, I did that because I don't want people to think I'm atheist.
No, you're just listening to a conversation.
Yeah.
So
I'm gonna cut that out. I'll cut it out. Yeah.
Well, that part maybe. You can. No, I don't care if you do or you don't. It's fine if you want to leave it in. It's probably just as well. We can have that conversation down the road.
Yeah, but you have to wrap it up to say goodbye. So I
want to thank you very much for your time.
It was a great day, man. We talked about some really interesting topics. I appreciate you having me on the show, man.
No, thank you for having us.
The edge.
And Alex, I can't say enough for you. You've done a great thing, and looks like we've got a thing to work in the future for.
Yeah, thank you for the people leaving the comments on the edge, man. Hope you guys like the new edge.
Mm-hmm.
They definitely like it, so we're gonna keep it going, guys. All right, Augie.
Yeah, that's right, and you born again especially.
Yeah. Don't worry, a lot of Augie stuff coming, man. All right, boom.